He ruled WWE for over a decade. He carried the bloodline, shattered records, and redefined what it meant to be a champion. But behind the spotlight, Roman Reigns was fighting a silent war, one that nearly ended everything. This is the untold story of Roman Reigns' collapse backstage, the heartbreaking leukemia diagnosis, and the emotional hospital visit from his wife, Galina Becker. From ICU beds to WrestleMania stadiums, this cinematic exposé follows his journey through pain, redemption, and the most powerful farewell wrestling has ever seen. Imagine the quiet hum of an industrial hallway deep beneath the roaring chaos of a WWE arena. The air smells like sweat, concrete, and freshly unwrapped medical gauze. Fluorescent lights flicker faintly above a stretch of linoleum floor, casting a sterile glow on a row of locked doors. One of them swings open slowly. And out stumbles the most powerful man in professional wrestling. Roman Reigns. His skin is ashen. His breath is shallow. His eyes, once filled with fire and command, are wide with confusion, pain, and something else, fear. He grips the edge of a supply cart, knocking over bottles and wraps as he tries to steady himself. A trainer shouts. A medic rushes in. Within seconds, the hallway that had been deserted becomes a flurry of movement. Radios crackle. Security swarms. Somewhere down the hall, the crowd is still cheering, unaware that their tribal chief has just collapsed backstage. Roman Reigns was rushed out of the building under a heavy shroud of secrecy. Cameras were blocked. Cell phones confiscated. Not a single official statement made its way to the public, not yet. WWE staff whispered among themselves in stunned tones. Some said it was exhaustion. Others mentioned dehydration. But the truth was far more devastating. Roman Reigns had been quietly battling symptoms he refused to speak aloud. He was diagnosed with leukemia once before. And now, it had returned. By the time the black SUV reached the hospital's private entrance, Roman was barely conscious. Paramedics worked quickly, their movements crisp, urgent, clinical. The heart monitor beeped erratically. And 4 was already in his arm. He tried to say something, perhaps a name, perhaps a prayer, but the words caught in his throat. The tribal chief, the head of the table, the immovable force who had stood at the center of WWE's universe, was now a man laid low by a disease he thought he had beaten forever. Inside the hospital, staff scrambled to prepare the private wing reserved for high-profile patients. The attending physician reviewed his chart and immediately ordered a full suite of blood work. Nurses whispered behind curtains. Security was doubled. The hospital administrator, a woman who had handled everything from Grammy winners to political elites, turned to her staff with steel in her voice. No photos. No leaks. This is a matter of international media interest and human decency. Outside, night had settled over Los Angeles like a heavy blanket. But in one home perched above the glowing sprawl of the city, another battle was already brewing. Galina Becker, Roman Reigns' wife, was sitting in their living room when her phone rang. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, but the words shattered her world. He's collapsed. We're admitting him now. You need to come. She didn't scream. She didn't ask questions. She simply stood up, grabbed her keys, and walked out the door. In the years since Roman Reigns rose to global stardom, Galina had watched her husband become a god among men. Fans chanted his name. Critics praised his evolution. He carried the weight of WWE's future on his back and rarely showed signs of strain. But at home, she had seen the quiet moments, the fatigue he couldn't explain, the nights he stared into the mirror a little too long, the checkups he kept postponing. She knew something was wrong. She had begged him to rest. But he had insisted on fighting, as he always did. Until his body could no longer protect the warrior spirit within. When Galina arrived at the hospital, the lobby had already been cleared. A nurse met her at the entrance and led her through a maze of corridors until they reached a restricted floor. A pair of plainclothed security agents nodded as she approached, recognizing her instantly. She didn't hesitate. She didn't cry. She just kept walking, her footsteps echoing like drumbeats through the sterile hallway. Behind one of those locked doors, Roman lay surrounded by machines. His chest rose and fell in slow, labored intervals. Electrodes were attached to his temples and chest. An oxygen mask obscured part of his face. Galina stood in the doorway for a moment, staring at the man she had built a life with, the man who had once held her hand in the delivery room, who whispered promises to their children as they slept. Now he was silent, still, fragile in a way she had never seen. She walked to his side and took his hand. "I'm here," she whispered, pressing her forehead to the back of his fingers. "You're not alone." Meanwhile, in Connecticut, the headquarters of WWE had gone into crisis mode. Executives were pulled from sleep. Paul Triple H Levesque paced the halls in silence. Nick Khan demanded updates every hour. Michael Cole cancelled a live taping. Everyone who had ever worked with Roman was stunned into disbelief. Because this wasn't just a health scare. This was the center of their universe being ripped from its axis. Roman Reigns wasn't just a superstar. He was the Empire's foundation. And if he fell, what happened to the rest? Back at the hospital, doctors worked through the night. The preliminary results had confirmed it. The leukemia was back. This time it had returned aggressively. They began preparing for chemotherapy, but cautiously, gently, aware of the weight the name carried. It wasn't about the press yet. It wasn't about the fans. It was about saving a father, a husband, a son, a man who had spent years playing a character so invincible that people forgot how human he really was. And Galina, ever the anchor, stayed rooted at his side. Nurses whispered in awe. "She hasn't left once," one of them said during a shift change. "Not to eat. Not even to take a call." In moments of quiet, she would hold Roman's hand and speak softly. "The kids are okay," she'd say. "They're with your mom. I told them you just need to rest, but they miss you." She would pull out her phone and play videos, clips of their daughter singing, of their boys roughhousing in the living room. She hoped the sound might stir something in him. Sometimes, his eyes flickered. But mostly, he slept. And in that sleep, the world outside exploded. Word had leaked. Not officially. Not publicly. But it had started, a single anonymous tweet from someone claiming to be a nurse in California. Roman Reigns admitted to hospital. Collapse backstage. Something serious. The tweet went viral in minutes. News outlets picked it up. TMZ ran a headline. And then came the frenzy. Fans flooded social media with hashtags, #PrayForRoman, #ReignsStrong, #TribalChiefForever. At the same time, rumors swirled with venomous speed. Some said it was a heart attack. Others swore it was drugs, that the pressure of the spotlight had finally broken him. A few cruel voices even called it karma, mocking his past dominance as arrogance finally humbled. But those who knew him, truly knew him, said nothing. Because in that hospital room, none of that mattered. Galina refused interviews. WWE issued a single, carefully worded statement: Roman Reigns is receiving medical care and is surrounded by family. We ask for privacy at this time. But the fans wanted more. They demanded answers. They needed hope. And somewhere deep within that sterile ICU, hope flickered faintly behind Roman's closed eyes. It was early morning when the first real movement came. Galina had dozed off, her head resting against the hospital bed, still clutching Roman's hand. A nurse stepped in quietly to adjust the four, but then paused. Roman's fingers twitched. Galina stirred. The nurse leaned in. "Ma'am," she whispered. "I think he's waking up." Galina blinked the sleep from her eyes and sat upright. Roman's chest rose in a shudder. His eyelids fluttered. A low groan escaped his lips, weak, raw, but unmistakably real. She squeezed his hand gently. "Roman, baby. I'm here. You're okay." You're safe. His lips parted, barely. Gal, she choked back a sob and leaned closer. Yeah. It's me. You're not going anywhere. His breathing grew heavier. His eyes finally opened, just a crack, unfocused, blurry. But they found her. She smiled through tears. I've got you. For that moment, the titles didn't matter. The fans, the feuds, the rivalries, the stadium lights, they all disappeared. There was no tribal chief, no bloodline, no championship belt draped across his shoulder. There was only a man, broken but breathing, and the woman who never stopped fighting for him. The news hit the WWE locker room like a thunderclap. By midday, everyone from the newest developmental recruits at the Performance Center to veterans like Randy Orton and Seth Rollins had heard the same whispered truth: Roman Reigns wasn't just sick, he was fighting for his life again. It didn't come through a company-wide memo or an emergency talent meeting. It came in murmurs. Through group chats. Through solemn looks exchanged between superstars backstage at SmackDown, where rehearsal suddenly felt meaningless. Paul Heyman sat alone in a dark corridor just outside the production truck, his face buried in his hands. No camera rolling, no speech to deliver. The man known for his silver tongue couldn't muster a single word. He had spent the better part of the last 3 years by Roman's side, first as his advocate, then as his strategist, always as his confidant. He had watched Roman dismantle opponents and shatter records. He had watched him transform from booed babyface to iconic heel, redefining what it meant to lead in WWE. But this? This was a script no one could rewrite. This was reality, and reality didn't care how many pay-per-views you headlined. In the women's locker room, Rhea Ripley sat quietly, scrolling through headlines on her phone, her usual confidence subdued. I never thought we'd see this again, she muttered. Bayley looked up from lacing her boots. I thought he beat it. I thought he was untouchable. No one was. Not even Roman. Meanwhile, Jimmy and Jey Uso, his cousins, his brothers in everything but name, had vanished from their scheduled media appearances. Their flights were rerouted. WWE made excuses to the press. Family emergency was the only explanation given. But those close to the bloodline knew the truth. They were headed to Los Angeles. Not as performers. Not as characters. As family. When they arrived at the hospital that evening, the mood was grim. Security recognized them instantly, waving them through the underground entrance. Jay's eyes were rimmed red. Jimmy walked beside him, shoulders square, jaw tight. There were no cameras. No promos. No stories to protect. Only a door at the end of the hallway behind which the man they had followed into war lay fighting an invisible enemy. Galina stood when they entered. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Jay walked to Roman's side and placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "Yus," he whispered. "We're here, man. We got you." Roman didn't respond, but his eyes shifted slightly under closed lids, as if even in sedation, he could feel their presence. They stayed for hours. At one point, Jimmy sat beside the bed and pulled something from his coat pocket, a faded photo of all 4 of them at WrestleMania 37. Roman in the center, the Usos flanking him, Paul Heyman in the back, grinning like a man who knew history was being made. He propped the photo against the heart monitor. "Still the champ," Jimmy said softly. "No matter what." Elsewhere in the building, Galina slipped out for the first time in hours. A nurse insisted she take a break, just for a few minutes. She found herself in the hospital's rooftop garden, lit by dim bulbs strung between trees and benches. The California night air was cool, crisp. But inside her chest, the storm still raged. She thought about the beginning, back when she first met Joe, before he was Roman, before the world claimed him. Back when he was still the quiet college football player with the kind eyes and big dreams. They had built everything from scratch. 3 children. A home full of laughter and noise. And then, cancer. Twice now. Twice he had faced death, and both times he chose to fight. She looked out across the city. Headlights blinked far below. The world kept turning. The shows went on. The belts changed hands. But none of it mattered to her anymore. Her husband was in that room, fighting a war inside his own blood. The next morning, WWE went public. The statement was short, respectful, and read in solemn tones across every sports news network. Roman Reigns, real name Lady Joseph Anoa'i, was hospitalized following a backstage collapse and has been diagnosed with a recurrence of leukemia. He is currently under medical supervision and surrounded by family. We ask for privacy and continued prayers during this time. The internet erupted. Superstars past and present posted tributes. The Rock tweeted, "Blood is thicker than anything. Stay strong, yes. You're a warrior." John Cena followed with a photo. No caption, just the two of them embracing backstage years ago. Fans from every corner of the globe sent messages. Art. Songs. Hashtags. Prayers. Even critics, the ones who once booed him relentlessly, offered support. Because beneath the gimmick, beneath the crown and the chaos, was a man who never stopped fighting. At the hospital, Galina returned to the room and found a new face by the bedside. Paul Heyman. He stood stiffly, his hands folded in front of him, eyes locked on Roman's face. He didn't hear Galina enter until she spoke. "You came." He turned, startled. "Of course I came." His voice broke. He composed himself. "He's not just my tribal chief. He's my friend. He's everything." Galina nodded slowly. "I know." They stood in silence together, watching the rise and fall of the man who had carried them all. Heyman cleared his throat. "Do you think he can hear us?" Galina didn't hesitate. Yes. He always could. And so, one by one, they all came. Sami Zayn. Kevin Owens. Cody Rhodes. Drew McIntyre. Each of them, in quiet moments, came not to gawk or perform, but to be near him. Because Roman Reigns wasn't just the face of the company. He was a pillar. A man who had carried the burdens of legacy, fame, illness, and expectation without letting the world see the cracks. Now, as the days passed and the treatment began, the world waited. Not for a match. Not for a promo. But for a miracle. Roman opened his eyes again 2 days later. This time, longer. Clearer. Galina was there, as always. And so was Jay, sitting in the corner with tear-streaked cheeks. Roman's voice was hoarse when he finally spoke. "I didn't tap out, did I?" Jay laughed. "Nah, use. Never that." And in that moment, the room filled not with silence, but with life again. Because Roman Reigns wasn't gone. He was still fighting. And his family, both in blood and in spirit, were fighting with him. The recovery would be long. That much the doctors made clear. Chemotherapy had already begun, administered through a quiet drip that beeped alongside the monitors that kept track of Roman's heart, his oxygen, and his fragile equilibrium. His body was a battlefield now, one waged not in front of millions, not under the blinding lights of WrestleMania, but in silence. In pain. In exhaustion. Galina knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. But she also knew her husband. Roman Reigns didn't retreat. He rebuilt. The hospital wing had become a fortress. Not just of medical machinery and private security, but of love. A steady stream of support poured in. Flowers arrived from every major WWE brand. Anonymous cards were tucked into the delivery stacks, some from superstars who didn't want credit, just to be heard. "You carried us," one card read, in handwriting unmistakably from someone who had once feuded with him in the ring. "Now let us carry you." Meanwhile, the outside world held its breath. WWE programming shifted overnight. The intro no longer ended with Roman's spear. Commentators grew quieter when referencing the bloodline. Michael Cole's voice cracked when he mentioned the word tribal chief during a segment. A moment of silence was held before the main event of Raw that week, an unspoken prayer for a man not gone, but not yet returned. Back in California, Roman had begun to speak again. Not for long. Not loudly. But enough. Enough to tell Galina, thank you. Enough to whisper to Paul Heyman, protect them. And enough to look into Jey Uso's tired, red-rimmed eyes and say, I still got fight left. They started rehab just 6 days after his first treatment. Slowly. Carefully. Roman sat upright in his bed for the first time, supported by pillows, breathing heavier than he ever had in the ring. A nurse guided him through basic movements. Finger grips. Toe curls. A few seconds standing, wobbling against the pressure of gravity and medicine alike. He grimaced through the pain, sweat beading on his brow, but he didn't stop. Galina watched him every step of the way, her hands clenched, her eyes never straying. When he finally collapsed back into the bed, gasping for air, she leaned in and kissed his forehead. You're still my champion, she whispered. Roman managed a tired smile. I'm gonna hold that belt again. You'll see. What he didn't know yet, what he hadn't seen, was what had begun to stir inside the company while he fought for his life. Backstage, in a closed-door meeting between Triple H, Paul Heyman, and a handful of trusted executives, something seismic was being discussed. Roman's future. His legacy. And the reality that if this was to be his final run, it deserved more than a quiet fadeaway. It deserved a send-off. A redemption arc. A closing chapter only he could write. I won't book him again until he says he's ready, Triple H said quietly, looking at Heyman. But if he comes back, I want the world to watch. Heyman nodded. And we make it count. Elsewhere, Jey Uso, now carrying the emotional weight of a fractured bloodline, began speaking with Roman's permission to some of the locker room. He's not done, Jey said. He might not ever be the same, but he's still in this fight. Some wanted to visit Roman. Some were afraid to. Seth Rollins asked 3 times. Eventually, Galina allowed it. Their reunion was quiet. No cameras. No audience. Just 2 men who had seen the peak and the pit of this business, former brothers, former rivals, united by something deeper than gold. Seth walked into the room, hesitant, dressed in black, hair tied back like he was attending a funeral. Roman raised an eyebrow. You gonna cry or sit? He rasped. Seth laughed through the pain in his throat. Still got jokes. Roman's voice was barely above a whisper. Still got enemies? Seth sat beside him and for a few moments, neither of them said anything. Then Seth reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something that made Galina pause in the doorway. It was the original Shield vest, faded, frayed, but unmistakable. I kept this, Seth said. All these years. Thought maybe, if you ever came back, we'd get one last run. Roman looked at it for a long time. Then at Seth. If I get back in that ring, it won't be to finish stories. It'll be to say goodbye. Seth swallowed hard and nodded. Then let's make it a goodbye no one forgets. After that, Roman began to improve faster than the doctors predicted. He still had rounds of chemo to endure. He still lost weight. His hair thinned. His strength came in bursts. But his will? That never dimmed. Every day, Galina pushed him. Every night, she whispered hope into his ears. And when he felt pain creeping into his spine, when his hands shook holding a cup of water, she held his face and reminded him, you beat it before. You'll beat it again. Because you're not just Roman Reigns. You're Joe. My Joe. Our kid's father. The man who survived. As the weeks went on, his voice returned. His appetite returned. And one day, standing with a cane in his hand and a scar down his arm from a recent injection site, Roman looked at the mirror in his hospital room and saw something new. Not the tribal chief. Not the unbeatable force. But the man underneath it all. Stripped of armor. Of titles. Of crowds. Just flesh, blood, and heart. And he still had all three. The sun had barely begun to rise over the Pacific when the hospital administrator entered Roman's room with a soft knock and a quiet smile. "Mr. Anoi," she said gently, "you're clear to go home." The words hung in the air like oxygen. Galina blinked slowly, her lips parting. Roman, sitting upright in the hospital bed, inhaled deeply, no oxygen mask, no drip, just breath. Pure, hard-earned breath. His face, thinner now, his eyes sunken from weeks of treatment, nevertheless glowed with something undeniable. Life. Galina turned to him. "You hear that?" she whispered, voice trembling. "Home." Roman gave her the faintest nod. "Yeah. Let's go home." The discharge was conducted under extraordinary measures. No wheelchairs in front lobbies. No press allowed within 5 city blocks. Roman's transport came through a freight elevator, down to an underground exit flanked by unmarked vehicles and security officers who'd been briefed that they were not just guarding a patient, they were guarding history. Galina helped him into the back seat of the SUV, her hand never leaving his. As they pulled away from the hospital, Roman leaned his head back against the seat and looked out the window at the world rushing by. The city buzzed with oblivion, cars honking, birds scattering. But inside that vehicle, there was stillness. Roman closed his eyes. It was the first time in weeks he didn't feel like a patient. He felt free. Back at their home in Los Angeles, the driveway had been cleared. No media, no noise, just silence and sunlight spilling across the pavement. Their children waited inside. Galina had prepared them as best she could, explaining that Daddy was tired, that he'd been in the hospital, that he needed quiet and hugs. But the second the front door opened, the silence was broken by the patter of little feet and the unmistakable sound of children screaming his name. "Daddy!" Roman knelt down, slowly, painfully, but he did it. He opened his arms wide, and all 3 children threw themselves into his chest. He wrapped them in his embrace, his breath catching in his throat as tears filled his eyes. He was home. He was still their superhero. Galina stood behind them, her hands over her mouth, silently weeping. Later that night, as the children slept and the house settled into calm, Roman sat on the back patio, wrapped in a soft hoodie and thick blanket. The ocean shimmered in the distance. The breeze rustled the palm trees. Galina brought him tea, sat beside him, and asked the question neither of them had dared voice since the diagnosis. "What now?" Roman stared out into the horizon. "I don't know," he admitted. "I'm not the same guy I was in that ring. Not sure I ever will be again." "You're stronger now," she replied. "Not because of what you do, but because of what you survived." He looked at her, that familiar fire flickering again in his eyes. "If I go back, I want to do it on my terms. Not as the tribal chief. Not even as the head of the table. I want to go back as me." Galina smiled. "Then we do it your way." What Roman didn't know was that plans were already forming in Stamford. Triple H had convened a meeting with the writing team. Not to pitch storylines. Not yet. But to prepare the stage. "When he's ready," he said, "we're not going to market a comeback. We're going to mark a legacy." Paul Heyman had already started quietly making calls. Arrangements were being made for vignettes, testimonials, slow burns. WWE would not exploit Roman's illness, but they would honor it. Not with pity, but with purpose. Because Roman Reigns wasn't coming back for a title. He was coming back to finish the story of a man who was never truly understood until he was nearly lost. Weeks passed. Rehab continued at home. Personal trainers were brought in. Nutritionists. A medical team on standby 24/7. Roman worked silently, methodically. Each day, he did a little more. A few extra steps. A longer stretch. A deeper breath. The pain remained, but so did the purpose. He wasn't aiming for WrestleMania. He wasn't aiming for any event, any spotlight. He was aiming for a moment. One quiet morning, as he jogged gently along the private trail behind his home, Galina watched from the deck, holding a cup of coffee, tears in her eyes. He was back. Not fully. Not yet. But enough. Enough to begin again. Meanwhile, the WWE Universe had shifted. The bloodline had splintered. Jay had risen. Solo Sikoa had taken control on SmackDown. Paul Heyman now stood in the middle of chaos, no longer aligned to any one person. Storylines were darker, more brutal, more uncertain. Because at the heart of it all, there was a void. And the fans felt it. Every week, they chanted his name. Every promo, every stare down, every locker room moment, Roman Reigns' shadow loomed over them all. And then, it happened. 3 months after Roman's collapse, WWE aired a silent, black and white promo at the end of SmackDown. No music. No narration. Just Roman, walking alone through an empty arena. No lights. No pyro. Just his footsteps echoing across the floor. He paused in the center of the ring and looked around at the empty seats. Then, he whispered 2 words into the camera. "I'm coming." And the screen went black. The world erupted. The crowd at the sold-out SmackDown event didn't know what to expect. The card had been stacked. The drama between Solo Sikoa's ruthless new bloodline and the defiant babyfaces had reached a boiling point. Paul Heyman was still floating between factions like a ghost of a fallen empire. And though the company hadn't advertised anything unusual, there was a quiet electricity pulsing through the arena. A sense that something, or someone, was coming. That sense exploded into reality when, just as the main event wrapped and the broadcast neared its end, the lights in the arena flickered. The crowd erupted in a mix of confusion and anticipation. And then, darkness. For a moment, silence. And then, a single heartbeat. Thump. The screen on the Titantron lit up with a phrase. "You forgot whose table this is." And then he appeared. Roman Reigns. Not in full tribal regalia. Not with the undisputed championship slung over his shoulder. Not surrounded by the Usos or flanked by Heyman. Alone. Dressed in all black, leaner, eyes hollow yet burning. He walked out slowly. Purposefully. Every step landing like thunder on the ramp. The crowd didn't cheer. Not at first. They just stood, thousands of them, stunned into silence. Then, as he stepped into the ring and stared into the camera, the wave hit. A sound like nothing WWE had heard in years. A roar of emotion, not just adoration, not just shock. It was awe. And as the camera zoomed in on Roman's face, what the world saw wasn't a champion returning. It was a survivor. He took the mic slowly. His hand shook, just slightly, as he raised it to his lips. "I wasn't supposed to be here tonight," he said quietly. 3 months ago. I collapsed backstage. My body gave up before I did. I woke up in a hospital bed with tubes in my chest and doctors telling me my leukemia had come back. And the first thing I thought about wasn't titles. Wasn't the bloodline. Wasn't WWE. He looked up. Eyes gleaming. It was my wife. It was my children. It was the moment I might not get to say goodbye. The arena fell into a hush. And then I thought about all of you. Every person who ever booed me. Every person who ever cheered. Every kid who saw me and believed I was invincible, and I realized something. I'm not the tribal chief because I wear gold. I'm the tribal chief because I survived. The crowd erupted. A chant began to build, Roman Reigns. Roman Reigns. But he held up a hand, silencing them. I'm not here to reclaim my throne. I'm not here to take back power. I'm here to finish my story. Not with gold. With peace. He paused. Let the crowd breathe. But before that peace, he said, voice cold now, eyes narrowing, there's one thing I need to do. He turned toward the camera. Solo. The crowd popped. You sat at my table. You wore my crown. And then you let it all rot from the inside out. You tore apart what I built. You let the world believe I was weak. His voice dropped, thick with venom. You tried to become me. Another pause. Another ripple of tension. But I'm not coming to reclaim the bloodline, I'm coming to destroy it. The lights cut to black. The Titantron went dark. And in that silence, WWE changed forever. Backstage, the shockwaves were immediate. Jey Uso stood in gorilla position, hands on his head, pacing back and forth. Jimmy was already calling Galina. Paul Heyman froze. His eyes welled up with tears. He's back, Heyman whispered. God help us, he's really back. Within minutes, the internet was in flames. Clips of Roman's return shattered viewership records. TikTok, Instagram, X, every platform was flooded with one image, Roman Reigns, eyes burning, declaring war on the kingdom he once ruled. But this wasn't a comeback fueled by ego. It was a reckoning. Galina watched from home, the kids asleep, her hands clasped over her heart. She didn't cry. She didn't cheer. She just whispered to the screen, finish it. And Roman would. Because what came next was not a chase for a title. It was a farewell, a warpath paved in blood, redemption, and one final match that would define a generation. He had faced death. Now, he would face his past. And when the dust settled, the table would be empty. But Roman Reigns would finally be free. The return of Roman Reigns wasn't just an event. It was a reckoning. And WWE knew it. Within a week, the landscape of the company shifted around him like tectonic plates. Storylines were reshuffled. Pay-per-view cards rewritten. All roads now pointed toward one final arc, the dismantling of the bloodline, and the redemption, or damnation, of its architect. But Roman had no interest in dragging this out across years. He knew the limits of his body now. Every morning, when he looked in the mirror, he saw the toll the battle with leukemia had taken. Not just on his muscles or his lungs, but his soul. This return wasn't about proving he still could. It was about ending things the right way. Not with silence. Not with rumors. But with truth. He issued the challenge a week later. Live on SmackDown, under the searing lights and thunderous chants, Roman Reigns stood alone in the center of the ring and looked straight into the camera. Solo Sikoa, he said, you want to sit at my table? Then fight me for it. The crowd went berserk. But not for the title, Roman continued. Not for the bloodline. This isn't about legacy or gold. This is about family. This is about betrayal. And this is about the man who made you, taking you apart, piece by piece. He paused. You want my crown? Then take it from me, at WrestleMania. And just like that, the main event of WrestleMania 42 was born. Not for a belt. Not for brand supremacy. But for something deeper. One final war. Roman Reigns versus Solo Sikoa, blood versus blood. The road to WrestleMania was a storm. Jey Uso returned to his conflicted roots, caught between brothers. Jimmy refused to pick a side, torn between his loyalty to Solo's dominance and the pain still lingering from Roman's absence. Heyman tried to stay neutral, but the man who had stood by Roman through his greatest rise couldn't hide his fear. He knew what this was. It wasn't just a match. It was a farewell tour. Roman spent those weeks preparing not just his body, but his soul. Rehab continued, even as he trained in secret. Galina watched him push himself harder than he had since his first diagnosis. This wasn't about reclaiming his yard. This was about tearing down the house, so that no one else could burn it to the ground. In private, Roman had one condition for WWE. I want matches on my terms. No titles. Just names. Just faces. And so began the Reign finale, a 4-match odyssey through the men who defined his legacy. First, AJ Styles. The man who had once tested his dominance when Roman first stepped into the role of world champion. The phenomenal one gave everything. Roman, slower now, but sharper, beat him clean. Then came Seth Rollins. Theirs was never just a rivalry. It was brotherhood fractured by ambition. In an emotional match on Raw, Roman defeated Seth with a spear that left them both breathless. After the bell, they sat in the ring, heads bowed, foreheads pressed together. No words. Just understanding. The third match was Cody Rhodes, the man many believed had surpassed Roman during his absence. They met at Elimination Chamber. No interference. No outside story. Just a handshake before the bell and a war until the end. Roman won, barely. But after the bell, he pulled Cody in and said, "Go finish your story. I'm done writing mine." And then there was only one left. Solo. WrestleMania 42 arrived like a tidal wave. The stadium was sold out. The world watched. And Roman Reigns walked the ramp one final time. Not with pyro. Not with a crown. Not with the championship. But with his daughter on his shoulders. His sons holding Galina's hands as they stood at the top of the ramp. He kissed each of them and walked alone to the ring. Solo waited, younger, stronger, hungry. But Roman had something Solo never would. Wisdom. Scars. Purpose. The bell rang. And what followed was a match that will be remembered for decades. 26 minutes of brutality, blood, family, and legacy. Solo hit Roman with everything. But Roman kept getting up. Until he couldn't. Until Solo hit the Samoan spike, and Roman fell. 1. 2. Roman kicked out. Barely. And then, silence. Roman stood, legs trembling. He looked Solo in the eyes. And then lowered his hands. No defense. No offense. He just opened his arms. Solo hesitated. Roman whispered, "Do it." And Solo, with rage and confusion in his heart, did. A final spike. 1. 2. 3. The stadium was stunned. Solo won. Roman Reigns had lost. But in truth, he had already won. Because this wasn't a loss. This was an offering. A passing of the torch. A full circle ending to a dynasty built on pain and pride. As Solo stood, his face unreadable, Roman sat up, coughing blood, eyes wide with defiance. And then, he smiled. He whispered something we couldn't hear. Solo nodded. And left the ring. Leaving Roman to rise, one last time, and bow. To the crowd. To the industry. To the story that was now complete. Galina met him on the ramp. She wrapped his arm around her shoulders. He leaned into her, weak but proud. And together, they walked up the ramp, children waiting at the top, WrestleMania roaring behind them. No belts. No fireworks. Just legacy. Just family. Just the end. After WrestleMania 42, Roman Reigns disappeared from WWE television. No dramatic send-off. No press tour. No Hall of Fame induction ceremony, not yet. He simply vanished. And for the first time in over a decade, the WWE Universe didn't chase him with questions. They just let him go. Because they understood. The reign was over. And what followed wasn't a fall, it was a quiet, dignified walk into the next chapter of his life. Roman and Galina returned to their home in California, this time with no looming road schedule, no early morning flights, no backstage segments to film. The days became slower, softer, more real. He spent his mornings walking his daughter to school, coaching his son's little league practices, cooking breakfast instead of cutting promos. He was no longer the tribal chief. To most of the world now, he was just Joe, a father, a husband, a man who survived something few truly understood. Occasionally, he'd pop up in public, photographed at a charity gala with Galina, or spotted at a UFC event with Paul Heyman quietly by his side. But he never did interviews. Never addressed his retirement. Because to him, it wasn't retirement. It was peace. Backstage at WWE, his absence was deeply felt. Not just as a performer, but as a leader. Younger talent who had idolized him, like Braun Breaker, Grayson Waller, and Austin Theory, often spoke about the advice Roman had given them quietly, away from cameras. Always make it mean something, he once told Breaker. Whether you're holding the belt, or laying on your back. Paul Heyman stayed in the company, but he was changed. Softer. Quieter. Some said he kept a photo of Roman in his briefcase, though he never confirmed it. The bloodline continued, fractured and scattered. Solo Sikoa ruled for a time, but he never claimed the title tribal chief. Not after what happened. Because everyone knew, there could only ever be one. In time, WWE announced a tribute. Not a farewell. But a celebration. The Last Reign. A WWE documentary event premiered on Peacock 8 months after WrestleMania. It chronicled Roman's journey from football fields to the squared circle, through cancer, fatherhood, faction warfare, and finally to his silent goodbye. The final moments of the documentary showed him sitting by a campfire outside his home, flanked by Galina and his 3 kids, the night sky wide and clear above them. The interviewer asked, off camera, "Do you miss it?" Roman smiled. Every second of it. Then he looked at his kids roasting marshmallows beside him. But I don't regret walking away. A long pause. Because I left standing. And with that, the screen faded to black. Social media exploded with love. Fans, superstars, commentators, all united in tribute. #ThankYouRoman trended worldwide for 3 days. In the years that followed, Roman made rare appearances. He inducted Heyman into the Hall of Fame, delivering a speech that moved the entire industry to tears. He appeared at a WrestleMania in a suit, seated beside Galina, standing only once, when Jey Uso won the WWE Championship. And in 2030, when he himself was inducted into the Hall of Fame, his speech was short. Gracious. Powerful. He ended it with a line that echoed across the arena, "I carried the company. I carried the legacy. And now, I carry peace. Believe that." The crowd rose. Not as fans. But as witnesses. To a man who took everything, the cheers, the boos, the disease, the pressure. And turned it into greatness. Roman Reigns didn't just dominate an era. He defined it. And then, when the time came, he walked away with dignity still intact, leaving behind more than a record. He left behind a lesson. That strength isn't just about how long you hold the crown. It's about how you let it go. Legacy is a word that gets thrown around often in WWE. Some build it through titles. Others through unforgettable moments, ladder matches, heel turns, shocking betrayals. But Roman Reigns? He built his legacy through evolution. Not just of a character, but of a man. Years after his final match, the effects of his reign could still be felt in every corner of the company. The structure of storylines changed. The bar for main event storytelling was higher. No longer could a champion just be dominant, they had to have layers. Conflict. Purpose. Emotional weight. The bloodline had introduced a new storytelling blueprint, a family drama wrapped in the theatrics of wrestling. And Roman had been its architect. Its cornerstone. And eventually, its wrecking ball. Every major faction that followed bore his fingerprints. Whether it was a new faction led by Solo Sikoa built on fear and silence, or the faction of rebels that rose against them led by Cody Rhodes, the echoes of Roman's rule were everywhere. His shadow became a measuring stick. Is he as good as Roman? Fans asked of every new champion. Is this faction the new bloodline? But none could truly replicate the magic. Because what Roman had done wasn't just win matches. He made people feel. Every spear. Every whisper. Every cold stare into the camera. It all meant something. Even his silence spoke volumes. And that's what separated him from the rest. Behind the scenes, the influence ran even deeper. Superstars who once sat silently in catering were now requesting creative input. They cited Roman's final run, the Reign finale, as proof that wrestling didn't need constant title defenses or 50-50 booking. It needed storytelling. Real storytelling. Roman had sat in those creative meetings during his return, weakened from treatment, and said, "Make it about emotion, not just impact. I'm not here to pop the crowd. I'm here to break them." And he did. He broke them with quiet anguish. With whispered threats. With a family imploding under the weight of a crown that became a curse. He turned wrestling into Shakespeare. And after him, everything changed. WWE began to invest more in long-term arcs. More documentaries. More grounded promos. Young stars like Ava Raine, The Rock's daughter, cited Roman as her personal hero. "I didn't want to be the next Rock," she said in an interview. "I wanted to be the first woman to lead the locker room like Roman did." Merchandise from the Reign era still sold in record numbers. Black t-shirts with "Acknowledge Me" printed across the chest became a cultural symbol. Not just of power, but of respect. And then, there was the ripple effect in the real world. Roman became a symbol of strength beyond wrestling. Cancer survivors wrote to him. Kids battling leukemia carried his action figures into chemotherapy. He never called himself a hero. But he was one. And Galina? She became a symbol too. Of loyalty. Of love. Of what it meant to walk beside someone not just through spotlight, but through shadow. Their marriage became a rare thing in the world of entertainment, a quiet pillar, unshaken by fame, scandals, or separation. They appeared together only rarely, usually at charity events for childhood cancer research, or in quiet sit-downs with no makeup, no lights, just them, speaking to families going through the same war they had fought. Roman often said, "I was strong in the ring. But I only survived because she was stronger outside of it." Eventually, WWE renamed its annual pediatric fundraising campaign. It used to be called Connor's Cure. Now it was called Reign for Life. And Roman? He never asked for that. He didn't want statues. He didn't want tribute matches. He didn't want legacy. But it came anyway. Because legends don't choose to be remembered. They just are. And Roman Reigns, the quiet, stoic powerhouse from Pensacola, Florida, became something bigger than the industry he once ruled. He became a symbol of redemption. Of survival. Of family. And of the truth that even kings must bleed, but the greatest ones rise again. So when the day came, 10 years after his last match, that WWE announced his induction into the Hall of Fame, the world stood still again. Not for the spectacle. But for the story. Because this was a man who started as the most booed babyface in history, and walked away as the most beloved icon of his era. The night of his induction, Galina took the stage first. She didn't speak long. Just enough. "My husband wasn't just strong because of what he did," she said, voice trembling. "He was strong because of what he endured. And because he never let pain steal his love, for this business, for his fans, or for his family." When Roman came out, he didn't wear a suit. He wore his old vest. faded, battle-worn. He stood at the podium and looked out at the crowd, many of them chanting, crying, cheering. He waited until the noise died. Then he said, "I never wanted to be anyone's hero. I just wanted to be there for my family. Turns out, that family was a lot bigger than I thought." He smiled. And then, one last time, raised his hand and said, "Acknowledge me." And the world did. Forever.